Hello, my name's Emma Clee and I'm an occupational therapist, and I'm going to be talking to you about viewing your child from a sensory perspective. This is based on a talk that I did for parents at the last coffee morning at the beginning of February. Not all children have sensory issues, but it's useful to have an understanding of sensation and sensory issues because it helps us look at children's behaviour and why they might find certain situations difficult. So exactly that, why. We're going to give you another perspective to help you understand your child, to find out why some situations might be challenging, and to give you different ideas to try. Now, I'm very aware at Portesbery we have children with a wide range of needs, so this is very much a very broad overview. We're going to look at what sensory integration is. We're going to talk about the 7 sensory systems and think about what we can do to help. And it's really useful to think about how sensation impacts on our lives and our children's lives, and how it can affect our learning, and how we feel, and how we behave, and how we cope with life. So this is a very simple example of how integration of sensation is important just within daily activities. So, for example, just getting out a bowl of cereal in the morning will involve you bending down, which uses your vestibular system, which we'll talk about more later, leaning forward and reaching, and that involves our proprioceptive system, which we'll talk about more later, holding the bowl, grasping and touching it using our touch sense, looking at where we're reaching using our vision, hearing the cornflakes come out of the packet, smelling the smell of the cornflakes, and then tasting them. So in just a simple activity of having a bowl of cornflakes, we're using quite complex sensory integration. So the term sensory integration is used in a variety of different ways. It can refer to a specific approach to treatment, and so that's when therapists have additional postgraduate training to carry out sensory integration treatment. But it's also can be used in literature talking about how we integrate sensation at a nervous system level. So how sensation comes into our body through receptors, and how we take it through the nervous system up to our brain, and how we organise it. But I guess what I'm most interested in is how we then organise a sensation for use, for function, and being an occupational therapist, that's what I'm really interested in. Sensation has a key influence on a number of different things, including our development, how we behave, our well-being, and it can influence our character as well. And sensation impacts us on a physical and an emotional level. So there are 7 sensory systems that we all use very automatically within our body. So the first 5 you'll probably know about, and the last 2 you may not have heard of. So we have our touch or tactile system, our vision system, our auditory, our hearing system, our sense of smell, our sense of taste, our sense of proprioception, which is related to body awareness, and our vestibular system, which is to do with balance. And we'll talk about those in more detail. But when these 7 systems are integrated well together, they allow us to do things like pour a bowl of cornflakes. They provide the building blocks for us to learn higher level skills, and so that's particularly why I'm interested in it for children. It helps us tune into what sensory information we need and disregard other sensory input. And as adults, if our sensory systems are working well, we do this so automatically we don't realise we're even filtering. It contributes to us keeping on an even keel and feeling emotionally quite stable. And it contributes to our mental health. Ultimately, it helps us to keep calm and carry on. But for some children, we know this can be very difficult. So in some children, we see that they have an over-response to sensation, and they can be very sensitive to it, such as very sensitive to touch or sound. Some children are under-responsive to sensory input and, for example, might trip up and hurt themselves and not feel it to the same level as we would expect. Some children are constantly on the go and are sensory seekers, but sometimes don't know when to stop sensory seeking, and they might become overwhelmed and disorganised. Some children may have difficulties with movement and posture, more of a dyspraxic type difficulty. And some children may have more discrete sensory difficulties, such as discrimination difficulties. Additionally, some children at school may have a diagnosed visual impairment or a hearing impairment, and some of our children who have physical disabilities may not have been able to physically explore the environment and get all the sensory experiences typically children would get. So our aim really with the children is to help children get the right level of sensory input, help them process it effectively, and so that they're at the right level to keep calm and carry on during their day. So now we're just going to have a little bit of a look in more detail at the 7 sensory systems, and we'll start off with touch. So there's 2 different types of touch sensation. There's a protective sense and there's the discriminative sense of touch. So the protective system is stronger at birth and lessens, and the discriminative system becomes stronger as we grow and more effective, and it allows us to, for example, if we put our hand in our pocket, we'd be able to feel what shape coins were in there, whether it's a 50p or a 10p. So quite discriminative high-level skills. We know some children seek touch a lot, yet other children tend to avoid it. And it's interesting touch because some children will come up and seek touch from you, but if you give touch to them when they're not expecting it, it can be very alarming for them. So it's about the child's nervous system being ready to receive sensory input. When children seek touch out themselves, their nervous system is craving it. When other people apply it to them, they may not be ready for it. And some children, because of perhaps their physical disabilities, find it difficult to get enough touch. And touch is more challenging if you can't see the input. For example, if you're putting a spoon in your mouth, you can't see the food going round inside your mouth. And touch can be more challenging if you're feeling slightly anxious or you're in an environment that challenges you. For example, if you're in a room full of friends and having a really nice time and somebody comes up and puts their hand on your shoulder, yes, it might make you jump a little bit, but you won't be too alarmed. If you're walking down a dark alleyway late at night and somebody puts their hand on your shoulder, you're going to have a far higher alertness and response level, and probably it would trigger a flight or fright or freeze response. You'd either want to hit out, run away, or be frozen to the spot. So think about the environment that children receive or get touch in. So for some children, this is an idea of heaven for them, and for some, it's the idea of hell, really. It's the worst thing that they'd want to do, the last thing they'd want to do. So thinking about vision. Now, tactile feeds into vision because as we learn to explore our environment through touch, it ties in with vision. So, for example, I know if I look across the room now and I look at the curtains, I know if I was to touch them that they would feel soft. And that's because I've had opportunity to experience and explore. Vision also gives us warning that something is going to happen. For example, if you can see that a door is closing, you're going to be prepared auditorily that there's going to be a slam. So think about for some children who find it difficult to perhaps move their head or to perhaps have good visual movements around their eyes. It's difficult for them always to use their vision effectively to monitor what's happening in the environment. Alternatively, you may see some children who are hypervigilant with their vision because they're always on the lookout for something that might be alarming and scary for them. And these are the children who are perhaps hypersensitive to things, who are very sensitive to noise or vision or other sensory inputs. With our visual skills, we need to be able to use them effectively to pick out detail and to understand what we see. And it's really interesting, isn't it? The world is increasingly a visually stimulating or distracting place, and I wonder whether there's just too much of that sometimes. And wouldn't it be lovely if we all had some more of this in our life? So moving on to hearing, and you'll probably understand as I'm going through the sensations, really the sensations are not working in isolation. There's overlap, there's integration between all of them. So hearing causes us to engage our vision. For example, if something drops on the floor, we automatically turn to look. And hearing can quickly impact our mood. For example, if you hear shouting, it can instantly make you feel anxious. If you hear soft, calm, rhythmical movement, it can begin to slow you down. Children, though, are interesting with hearing. Some can really tune in and some appear to be tuned out, and that can fluctuate during the day. For example, you may be chatting to your child right in front of you and them not processing what you're saying, but they're tuned in to, for example, a crisp packet being opened in the other room. And we have to be aware that some children find this sort of auditory processing challenging. So some children may need time to process what we hear, and some children may need us to repeat what has been said just to help with that processing. But it depends from child to child. So here's a child with sort of ear defenders on. So we know some children are very sensitive to sound. Other children will put their fingers in their ears as well to cover themselves from sound. But I just wanted to mention the use of these sort of sensory strategies and sensory tools that constantly revisit whether they're still useful. What I don't like to see is if things just become too habitual and that we're not moving the children on through developing better coping. For example, sometimes I see children with chewies, and I wonder really, is that still being helpful now, or has that just become a habit? Smell. So smell is very closely connected to our emotional memories. Sometimes we can smell things and it can take us way back to our childhood. So for some children, if they've had a negative experience and there's a smell associated to it, they may, the next time they smell that smell, have that negative association. And that can be difficult for us as adults to pick up on because it's such a discrete thing that we may have filtered out. Also consider that some children may not be effectively using their smell. For example, if they're mouth breathers rather than taking air up through their nose. And we know many activities are very closely related to smell, such as eating, bathing and toileting, and that can add to the challenge for some children. It's not always obvious what the problem is and what to do about it. It's quite a discrete difficulty. Oh, I'll just put this slide in. Does this make us all smile? Taste. So thinking about taste, and thinking about meal times really. So is it taste that's the issue, or is it texture? So these are the things we need to sort of begin to unpick really, because taste nearly always comes with some sort of texture and some sort of temperature. So looking at between the three of them, taste, texture and temperature, try and find out which one there might be an issue with. And remember, some children might like really spicy food, and some children may prefer very bland food. And it's important that we continue to sort of widen children's variety of food that they'll take, and also try and develop their ability to cope with a wide variety of temperatures, because this makes life easier. So proprioception. So this is quite a hidden sense, and a sense that you may not have heard about. And it's our body automatically telling our brain where it is in space. And the best way to sort of explain this is using the example of when you're learning to drive. So when you get in a car initially, that first driving lesson, you sit in the car, you hold onto the steering wheel probably very tightly. You have to look down to where your feet are on the pedals. You have to look down to change gear. And that's because our brain doesn't effectively know where our body is in relation to the activity that we need to do. And over time, our body awareness in this activity really improves, and it becomes automatic, and we can just drive from A to B eventually without even knowing how we got there. So really proprioception is our body awareness, and it's us knowing where our body is in space, and our messages are sent from the muscles and the joints up to our brain. And it's something that happens very automatically, but is a very important part of our sensory system. So the vestibular system is another very important part, and I would say the vestibular, the proprioceptive and the tactile systems are the three key systems that make us feel grounded. So the vestibular system is quite discrete as well. It helps us know where we are in relation to gravity, and it tells us how we're moving through space and the speed and direction of movement. For example, if I was to lay on the floor and shut my eyes, I would automatically be able to stand up because my vestibular system tells me where my body is in relation to gravity. Skiers, for example, have highly sophisticated vestibular systems that help them balance and help them bring them back to what we call the body's midline. So it's a really important sense of knowing where we are in relation to gravity, being upright, and how we cope with movement. Inside our body, we also have interoceptors, and they give us feedback as to if we're feeling hungry or if we're feeling thirsty, if we need to go to the toilet, and help us with temperature control. And if these aren't working very effectively, it means that perhaps some of our primary needs aren't being met at the right time. So perhaps as adults we need to be very good at predicting these needs and helping children to meet those needs. If these needs aren't met, it's very difficult to then work on anything, isn't it? Or concentrate or feel relaxed and happy. So we're generally really effective at being able to keep calm and carry on. It's important to remember, though, as adults, we add and remove things in our daily life to keep us on that even keel that we talked about, and we do that very automatically. For example, if we're driving the car and we might feel a bit sleepy, we might open the window to get the tactile input of fresh air. We might turn up the radio to onto a really lively song to make us feel really alert. Alternatively, if we were driving the car and outside the weather conditions really worsened and we had to really focus, we might take away some of the sensory input. For example, we might turn the radio off. We might, although it never helps, lean further forward in our seat to try and look through the windscreen. So we automatically do things in our day to help us function to the best of our ability. We automatically put things in and we automatically take things out. Now for children at school, they're less able to do this because they're pupils. So as teaching staff, we need to make sure that the teaching staff are very on board with knowing what to put in the child's day and what to take out to make them at their optimum level and to help them keep calm and carry on through their day. One of the issues children have is sensory overstimulation, and this is probably one of the most problematic areas of sensory processing, in terms of these children may become very overwhelmed and perhaps a little more disruptive in class. Normally during this time I show a video that's on YouTube that looks at how overwhelming environments can be for students. So, for example, there's one that shows a child going into a supermarket and being completely overwhelmed by the noise, or the visual input, or the movement that's going on around them. And how once they come out of the supermarket, the stimulation lessens. So I would say have a little look on YouTube, and if you type in, say for example, autism, sensory overstimulation, there's some good examples there, and I know parents have found them useful in trying to explain difficulties their children might be experiencing to other people. So after I've shown the audience this very overstimulating video, I show them something calming. So again, it's about putting something in that will help people's nervous system get back to the right level so that they feel relaxed and ready to attend. So we know the correct level of sensory input is required for development. We know that too much results in stress and behaviour difficulties. But equally, we know that too little results in brain abnormality and behavioural disorder. And this is seen, really when I'm talking about this, I'm perhaps looking back to when children were in orphanages in Romania about 30 years ago and were receiving very little sensory input, and that did have an adverse effect on their brain development, and subsequently they developed behavioural disorders. So start to think about yourself in relation to your sensory development and how sensation affects the things that you do. So if you think about your career choice and hobbies, these will all have been led by, or at least partly by, what your sensory needs are. For example, if you've chosen to be a librarian, it might be that you like visual input and you like a quieter environment. If you've gone on to be a fireman, it might be that you like an active job that involves a lot of movement and excitement. Think also about, for example, your holiday choices, and think about it before you had children, when you could just choose a holiday that was influenced purely by your sensory needs. Are you the type of adult that likes to go on holiday and flop on a sunbed, or are you the sort of adult that likes to go on holiday and go biking or go and look at galleries? So, sensation influences all areas of our life. But also think about how your nervous system can cope with input at various times in the day. For example, you may be able to cope with far more sensory input in the morning than you can do it in the evening, when ideally you might like a quieter time. And think about how your mood influences your response to sensory input. For example, if we look at this picture, if you're in a happy mood, what you might see is a kitten that's sleeping. But if you're in a rather sad, depressed mood, you might view that kitten in a different way. So with the children and the students at school, it's important to remember that we all children and all of us have sensory likes and dislikes. But it only becomes a problem when those likes or dislikes really disrupt daily life and your child's ability to take part in things. So things that you might see in your children is that they might have an exaggerated or over-respond to sensation. They might under-respond. They might seek sensation. Their responses might fluctuate, and that might be day to day, hour to hour, minute to minute for some children. Some children you may see who are mobile, but when you come to look closely, their mobility skills are not as effective as you might think. So a child might be able to run around but not have the ability to ride a bike. You might see some stimulatory behaviour from children, such as head banging or rocking. You may see very intense responses, so they're so focused on something, especially if it's novel. And you might see in some children a flight, fight or freeze response, that something is so overwhelming for them that they want to run away, or that they might automatically hit out, or they might freeze to the spot. So these are just some examples of the behaviours that you might see. But ultimately, for children to learn, we want them to be in a calm and alert state. We don't want children who are too chilled or under-aroused. And for these types of children who need more input, it might be that we add things into their day like very sort of alerting movement breaks, upbeat music, crunchy snacks, things that are going to have an impact on alerting their nervous system. Equally, we don't want children who are too over-aroused and perhaps unorganised. And these are the children that we might encourage to do more heavy, resistant, rhythmical type work to sort of slow them down. We don't want children who are feeling upset or overwhelmed, and these might be children that we might want to take things out of their environment, so it's a quieter environment, or take them out of the environment so they have opportunity to sort of recalibrate. What we do want are children who are calm and alert and able to engage. So what can we do to help? So these are just a few ideas, and there's lots of different information out there that you can get hold of, and I'll give you some resources at the end. So really, we are sort of trying to support the children by predicting and meeting their needs. And at school, there's a variety of different sensory opportunities and activities that the kids take part in their day as part of what we could call a sensory diet. But at home, just being more aware and having a greater understanding is a big help. And you can start to look at your home environment from a sensory perspective. Is it quite noisy? Is there lots of visual clutter? Is it a very busy environment? And think about if you can take things out or add things in that might help. And I'll give you some examples for those. For example, switching off the TV at certain times, having deep beanbags to sit in, removing lots of ornaments if there's lots of things out and about that might be too visually overwhelming. Thinking about having dim lighting or targeted lighting. Think about having more neutral, natural colours on the walls. For example, some children who like rocking might enjoy sitting on a cheap sort of gaming chair. Again, this is just an option for them to have, and you don't want things to become the whole focus of their life. These are just other sort of types of seats that children might like to sit on. A ball that can give them quite alerting and movement sensation, something that's more nest-like and cosy. The pea pod on the right is a more supportive sort of beanbag for children who have got physical disabilities because it can give them some postural management. And these lovely other big beanbags allow adult or teenage kids to really be enveloped and have a nice proprioceptive and tactile feedback sensation. Yeah, be aware of background noise because we as adults often really filter things out. And it can be discrete things as well, like the cooker extractor fan, the buzz of the computer, the boiler firing up, radiators making the floor creak. So just perhaps stop if you have a moment in your house and just really stop and listen, because the things that we're filtering out, the children may not be filtering out. And one way you can easily change the mood of a situation is with music and with lights. So it might be turning the lights off and having soft music for those soft, slow, rhythmical music for those children that are overwhelmed. For those children that need a little bit of boost in their alertness levels, it might be more flashing lights and more upbeat music. Thinking about self-stimulatory behaviour that some children exhibit, sometimes that can become from not knowing how to amuse yourself. Are there other ways that you can help a child amuse themselves? For example, activities that might help children meet their sensory needs that you have to do anyway. Get them to help you. For example, putting the clothes in and out of the washing machine, helping with the washing up, putting out the recycling bin. These are all sensory activities. So sometimes we don't have to go off and buy special things. Just think about what you can actually use in your environment. So for the child that loves vestibular movement, think about getting them involved with helping you with the hoovering, with wiping the table, washing the car, opening the curtains. Again, these are all activities you have to do anyway. They're all life skills, and even if the child can only participate hand over hand, still you're giving sensory input to that child and you're using it in a productive, functional way. Some children might like a swing in the garden, and there's lots of different types of swings that are now available for children who need very high level support to children who need very little support. And there are also frame swings that you can use within door frames internally. So for the child that likes proprioceptive, that body awareness feedback, things like shaking out the pillows and duvet to help make the bed in the morning, carrying the washing basket, again doing some of these household tasks, getting out in the garden, digging and raking. These are all proprioceptive activities. They all require a high level of movement, and they also all have a degree of resistance as well, which can be calming on the nervous system. So let's just start to look at 3 areas that all children, all students have to take part in. And we're going to look at sleeping, eating and bathing and showering. So here are just some sensory strategies. It's not one size fits all, and parents generally need to have a toolbox of tricks up their sleeves to try. So I'm not trying to teach parents to suck eggs, because you may well have tried a lot of these things, but they may be new to other parents. Think about your child's hunger level. Have their interoceptors that we talked about earlier picked up on whether the child is hungry or not? Giving children chewy carbs, such as like a rolled up like tortilla wrap, or a pita bread, something chewy to chew on, can help centre children who have got that level of eating ability. Having milk again to fill that hungry child up before they go to bed, because if you're hungry, you're not going to sleep. Think about the amount of level of physical activity the child has during the day. Are they getting enough? Luckily at school at Portesbery, the environment is so big that they do have a lot of exercise within their day. But often children need to be brought in by taxi or by car, so they do miss out on long periods of walking. Do you need to put more physical activity in within their day? Think about reducing stimuli during the evening, such as switching off the TV earlier, removing iPads earlier, making the environment quieter. Think about if you can teach the child how to do muscle release and active deep pressure. So for some children you may be able to teach them to squeeze up tightly into a ball and wrap their arms around their legs and give themselves a deep pressure squeeze. And this deep pressure can be calming and organising on the nervous system. Alternatively, you can do passive deep pressure, and this is about, for example, having a child lay on their side when they're in bed and gently pushing down, fairly firmly pushing down through the side of their body, starting at their shoulders and moving down through their trunk, down through their legs, down to their feet, giving passive pushing down to help them feel organised and calm. And for some children you can do this on the side of the head as well, but obviously it depends from child to child. But it's about helping them to relax and feel centred and calm in bed. Think about some children might respond to calming music or having white music on in the background if they don't like the silence. Sometimes having a weighted soft toy to curl around can be useful. Some children like to be tucked in tightly, and some children do use weighted blankets. Now, there is an air of caution around weighted blankets. A child must never be wrapped in a weighted blanket, and they should only be used with students who can have the physical ability to remove them. So they're not for children with physical disabilities. Oh, this is just an example of a child who may like a darker environment at night time. Just also consider, melatonin and its effects and its releases later when a child becomes a teenager. Think about what time bedtime is, and unfortunately you do normally have to make it later, even though I appreciate parents really, really need their evening time. But also consider, conversely, that for some children, being up at night time is a very attractive option because there's no demands on them. There's very little sensory stimuli unless it's what they seek out themselves. So, it is attractive for some kids to be up and awake at night, which isn't what you want to hear. So thinking about eating, again, a very sensory part of the day. Think about what you're working on when you're working on eating and feeding skills. And don't try to work on too many things at once. Perhaps just work on one thing. Because we need to recognise that for some children, sitting down at a table may be bringing together all the things they absolutely hate, which is sitting down, having different textures in their mouth, and smelling different foods. So I think make your goals small and work on one focus at a time. And try to identify where the problem with feeding may lie, such as we talked about before, like the texture, the temperature, or is it even the environment or the time of day. But you might be surprised if you keep a diary of what your child eats during the week. You might be surprised actually at the variety of food that they're eating. And remember, if you're introducing foods, don't hide new foods in safe foods, because then that safe food is no longer a safe food and you're limiting your options further. If meal times are stressful, ask others to perhaps build those skills that they're going to need for meal times later in life. For example, playing with food substances without pressure to eat. Learning to use cutlery to cut up a snack rather than within the busyness of a family meal. And perhaps doing activities with other members of the family around food, taste and smell, such as cooking with a grandparent. Also remember to explore whether medication might be impacting appetite, and also what are the stress levels like at meal times. Bathing and showering. Now, bathing and showering, both of these activities provide very different sensation for children. Bathing is a much more all-encompassing activity in that the pressure of the water is the same all over the body, whereas the shower can be more stimulating because it gives focused areas of pressure as the water comes out in jets. So think about what your child likes and what they don't like, or whether, for example, they may prefer a bath in the evening to help them calm down, or they might prefer a shower in the morning to help wake them up. Think about hair washing. Hair washing can be a challenge for a number of reasons, and one of the reasons can be the position that the child needs to hold their head in. So again, this thinking from the vestibular point of view and balance and gravity. Some children find it much easier to lean forwards, crouched in the bath, or leaning over forwards in the shower than they do tipping their head back. So that's something to try. Some children find it very difficult to have their eyes shut when their head's in a challenging position. So think about doing hair washing with the child sitting down rather than standing. And if the child has difficulty coping with the tactile element, try and, if they can understand that a beginning and an ending, say we're going to do 3 jugfuls of water, we're going to do this for a count of 10 or for 5, so that they know that there will be an ending to it. So try, if you can, to teach the child to do as much themselves as possible, and then they're providing the touch, tactile input into themselves, and it helps them build up their proprioceptive body awareness system. Be aware that it can be challenging, the smell of the soap and the shampoo, and sometimes changing those can help. Thinking about how the child likes to be dried. Do they like to be wrapped up tightly in a towel? Do they like to be squeezed? Do they like to be patted through the towel or rubbed by the towel? And think about when is the most tolerable time for doing bathing, showering, not only for the child but also for you as the adult assisting. So again, I think it's thinking about the child over 24 hours. Is there anything you can take in? Is there anything you can take out or modify in their sensory day? Thinking about sharing sensory interests, think about what your child likes and can you expand on that? So if the child likes music, expose them to all different types of music. Can you have time to share any quiet time where you really feel a connection? So sometimes we have such busy lives and there's so many tasks we have to get through. Is there an opportunity for even 5 minutes of sitting quietly with a child, perhaps doing some hand massage, lessening the environmental demands such as turning the lights down, turning noise off? Alternatively, it might be joining children in sensory environments that are more stimulated, like outside on the trampoline or inside a play tent. Think about if you can build skills together, such as learning yoga poses and use this as a way to calm in the evening, developing scooter or bike skills, or increasing the amount you can walk or jog together. What you're trying to do is put in sensory activities to help them remain calm and alert, and using these different types of activities can lead to a healthier lifestyle. So as a second to last slide, I think this is important to think about, that perhaps sometimes we need to learn from children and stop and appreciate the things our children appreciate. I'll give you an example of a lady that I was reading about who every day walked to school with her child, and her child would always lay down on the pavement next to a particular car. And obviously for her it was incredibly difficult because she needed to get the child to school. But in the end, one day she just decided to lay down with him, and she realised what he was doing was laying down to look at the reflection and the colours created by a shiny hubcap. And she said it just gave her a different perspective on what her child enjoys. So I wonder if there's things that as adults we miss out on and that our children can teach us. There's lots of additional resources out there. You can Google these resources. What I would say, a lot of the equipment is quite expensive. Have a look at some of the specialist websites, but then start to have a Google it and see if you can get it cheaper elsewhere. There's 2 networks. The Sensory Integration Network is a UK network that provides training and more information on sensory integration issues. Sensory Processing Foundation is in the States, but again you can access that online. There's lots and lots of books on Amazon. For parents of children with autism, there's quite a lot of information on the National Autistic Society website, and there's lots of videos that are useful on YouTube. So there's lots to learn, and I hope you have enjoyed the PowerPoint and that it's given you some chance to reflect on your child and also your own sensory needs. Thank you.